Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and this is my husband and co-host, Geoffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and my lovely and intelligent co-host, Geoffrey Tumlin.
Yellow.
And today we are going to talk about what we have, a little bit of science, a little bit of our experiences with working with people, what we think are some potential reasons behind midlife crisis.
Yes.
Which is actually very complex. So we're not saying that we got it nailed down.
Yes.
But we think maybe we got a few pieces.
Yes.
That we have put together.
Yeah. What's interesting about this is, number one, we should not be talking about midlife crises because we're not therapists. But in our role as coaches, we've seen more than our share of these. And you have to think through what you get. And so we are advising often to people who are basically in the grips of a midlife crisis, even though we're not therapists and even though we'll often recommend these people out. I think that's the first interesting thing. And the second interesting thing is that, as you've identified and we'll talk about in this episode, there's social science theory that may help explain what's happening.
It dances around. There's a lot of different pieces from social science that sort of piece together. And that's where actually my first thoughts on midlife crisis came from, was a paper that I was doing a long time ago when I was working on my PhD. That was on goal setting theory. And basically, goal setting theory essentially says, give people goals, give them challenging goals that are achievable but challenging, and you'll get great performance. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. There's obviously a lot.
Yep, people
have
made many careers.
Right. And
DC and Ryan.
What I noted in it is that even when we achieve a goal, whether we achieve or whether or not we fail to achieve a goal, there's actually a grieving process that happens. And the research would basically say, get them another goal as soon as possible. Because there's a little bit of a recognition that there's a listlessness. It's almost like when Forrest Gump stopped running, for anybody who's watched Forrest Gump.
Everybody's watched Forrest Gump.
Well, no,
our
generation has.
Spank yourself.
Well, just in case they haven't. So there's a scene where Forrest has been running across the country. He acquires all these followers, and basically he meets his goal. And so he stops, and all the followers are like, what? And they're just standing around and kind of looking at each other and don't know really what to do. And when I think about goals, once you achieve them, or like I said, fail to achieve them, that's kind of what you're just kind of standing around going what do I do now? And most organizations try to jump you back into another goal, recognizing that there's a little bit of listlessness. That's sort of the recommendation. I would say that can be perceived as just not ever really appreciating what somebody accomplishes. So from an organizational standpoint, I think you have to recognize those goals and celebrate those goals before you put somebody into the next challenging situation. Because even though people like goals, they like focus, they like to know what they're going to be judged upon. Everybody likes to have some recognition that they just did something, hard. And so so that's a little caveat to that. So anyway, I was working on this paper and realized that when somebody fails having a goal, everybody understands sort of their mood, their negative reaction to it.
Right. They get that.
But nobody actually understands that when you achieve a goal, that you actually still grieve the loss of a goal, and you can have this achievement and feel terrible on the inside, but nobody understands why you have it. And so like there's this whole disconnect between how you're feeling, what you just did, and then all the social things that are happening to you. And in that, I started to think about a little bit, this is the first time I was starting to think about midlife crisis, like to what degree is midlife crisis kicked off by the fact that like we're getting to a point, by the time you're in a midlife crisis, you're sort of at a point in organizations where like, you may not get promoted. You may be hitting the top of where you're going. And there's usually a trigger, and that trigger could be, hey, you probably just got your last promotion, or it could be that you failed to get your last promotion. And like, you feel like this disconnect that's happening between you, the goal, so society.
Well, right. But the disconnect only happens if you're successful in the goal with society, with your social support.
Right. On that one.
Yeah.
This is my first piece in thinking about it.
Which I think is a good insight, that sometimes we achieve a goal, and let's stick with promotion.
And in this case, the goal is the trigger. So
that's right.
There could be other triggers. Like an inheritance, which is also a good thing. If you wind up getting a large inheritance, that may be a trigger to then look around at your life and be like, well, I just got this inheritance. I do feel bad that this person I loved passed. And I'm looking at my life, or at least my career, probably especially your career for reasons we'll get into. And there's this disconnect between it all, right? Like, this good thing has happened with a bad thing. Also, like, I'm reassessing sort of where I'm at in life. Yeah.
I think, to me, this first piece of your unified theory, the interesting part is twofold. Number one, sometimes we achieve things, and to use your word, we do feel listless after, even though it's positive. Everybody recognizes it as positive, promotion, inheritance, whatever. But then the other thing is that when we, that is a little bit counterintuitive, because people think, well, we should be good and we should be happy. But that absence of a goal, or the end of that goal, the relinquishing of that goal, does sometimes cause people to either lose some steam or feel like they have to cast about for what comes next, which can, as you said, lead to the kind of introspection that encourages people to make significant changes. With the midlife crisis, I think you and I are mostly concerned with, we're not concerned with people making big changes in their life at any point. We're concerned with people making big changes based on incorrect information or skewed reflection.
Right, the bias that occurs. Because see what's happening with the gap. And again, like it doesn't have to be a positive thing. There's a trigger that causes sort of the introspection. But it can be a good thing. And that's the part that's a little different than I think most people think about. But the problem is that like there's cognitive dissonance there.
This is the second part of Cindy's grand unified theory. So you're going to have to explain that to the...
So cognitive dissonance is when, like, basically how you feel, act, and believe need to be in alignment, or else you feel lousy. And that lousy feeling drives you to either change your belief, change your behavior, or basically bias your perspective. I guess I would say, like, you're trying to get everything into alignment, so that way your feelings, your behavior, your actions, your beliefs, everything is moving in the right direction. And these are moments in life where they're not. And you got a bunch of people, especially on the positive side, you got a bunch of people saying, hey, that's great, you're really hitting it out of the park, and you feel lousy. And so that causes you then to do something to make changes, like to either understand why you feel lousy, which could maybe like cause some bias in sort of how you're evaluating the situation. Because what we see is, it's not it's not, we have in society this image of a midlife crisis as a Porsche and a 20-year-old. That's, some people have that, sure, but there are much more normal versions of a midlife crisis for people who are just like normal people. And yet that usually involves an implosion of your life where you feel lousy and you start looking around, and instead of just recognizing that this is just honestly a normal reaction to the resolution of a goal, instead of looking around and realizing it's normal, you feel lousy, yet you should feel great. So therefore, the people around me must be responsible for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we see a lot of this in physicians, doctors, dentists, and then there's what they sometimes call mid-levels or advanced practice providers, which is just a name for non-physician healthcare providers, which mostly include nurse practitioners and PAs or physician's assistants. And so a lot of these folks will come out of a significant amount of school, especially for the doctors and the dentists. They will land a job and everybody will be telling them, good job, you're a doctor now, you're a nurse practitioner, you're a PA, now you can get on with your career. And they have all of this social support saying good job, and they arrive at the job, and within a relatively short period of time, our working theory in a lot of these cases is what Cindi just described, is that they actually are goalless. They don't have a new goal. They've just finished a long multi-year slog of getting their credential, and now they're doing the work.
They achieved it.
That's right.
But the achievement is this career.
Yep. Yes. And so there's this vulnerable period where the cognitive dissonance creeps in because everybody's telling them they should be happy. In so many ways, the world is saying you should be happy, you should feel great, you're making good money, but they're not. And then because of that dissonance between what everybody's saying and what I think I should be feeling and what I'm actually feeling, people try to take action. And in a lot of these cases, we see these, and just I'm using this example, we can use hundreds of other examples outside of healthcare providers. But these folks actually begin to believe that something is wrong with the people they work with, or the systems where they work, or
or their family, or a combination of all of it.
Yeah.
And so that's the implosion.
Yes. Yeah. That's what we're calling midlife crisis, even though, it's
happening to some degrees all the time.
Yeah.
Honestly,
It's
just, it's more likely to happen at midlife because you also have like two other forces acting on it. You have this, like the regret research has shown that as you get older, you stop regretting the things you did and start regretting the things you didn't do.
Yeah, for sure.
And so now you feel like you're running out of time and you're regretting the things you didn't do.
Yeah, in the last clutches of that, then you're like, oh my God, I gotta hurry. If I don't,
or there's just no time. Whereas if it happens earlier in your career, like there's still like there's a sense. Sure. First of all, you're not in that sort of regret mode. You're more likely to, when you're younger, to have regret about the things that you did do, not the things that you didn't do, and so there's that. But then even if you feel the regret, you're like, I got time. I can work this out. And so, that's another force that's acting on, and the reason why we tend to be older when all this is happening.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that's kind of like, I was thinking about another way of saying a portion of what we're talking about with this midlife crisis is that there's this goal grief the grief of the loss of a goal that people don't fully appreciate. And if the goal has been successful, it's happening at a weird time when your close support group is all telling you great job and you're actually feeling down, looking for, you don't know enough to know to look for what's next, that's where a lot of our advice is when we recognize this in somebody, is to try to talk to them about how much of this might just be that you're in this space between goals that enliven and give people a sense of purpose. And you're looking for what's next. Can we help you look for what's next? What do you think might be the next
without
goal?
dismantling, like keeping the focus on, look, your negativity isn't actually about the people around you.
Yeah.
Your negativity is that, like, you need that next thing. You
Yes.
need to be able to think about what your future self is and drive towards that. That does not necessarily mean that you have to shed everybody and where you're working in order to get there.
Yes. Yeah,
You may, but not necessarily.
Yeah, Cindi and I, we're not opposed to people making changes.
In fact, I don't think people make enough changes, generally speaking. In this case,
Sure.
I think they're making too severe based on a disconnect, the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Generally, though, I think people stay in organizations too long.
For sure. Relationships,
Yeah.
organizations, cities, etc.
Because of the uncertainty factor.
Yeah, the penalty of uncertainty, which we'll talk at great length about in future episodes. The reason we care about this is that we are coaching people all the time who are basically contemplating blowing their life out. And I was going to ask what your estimate is of people who are contemplating blowing their life up, meaning in this instance, radically changing the work that they do and or basically unwinding from their core personal relationship. What percentage of cases do you think that when people are unwinding, considering a significant unwinding of their life, that they're actually guilty of overcorrecting for either this goal grief or trying too hard to get the cognitive dissonance back in sync, to reduce the cognitive dissonance?
Well, I think that there's a lot of ones that we just don't see, partly because, to some degree, for it to be hugely noticeable, like, you're standing out a little bit in the organization.
Yeah.
So I think that it's possible that there are others that we just don't see. But for the ones, the set that we have, like with the ones that we're working with and we're in conversations with them, we try to help support them through the transition to some success. But I think it's a very high percent of the ones that we see that wind up blowing it up because nobody really talks about this.
Yeah.
And so, like, how you feel is real. And you feel bad. And yet everything, like, the things that you were moving towards happened. And so not being successful in life, like in terms of like your goals, you eliminate that, then yeah, you go towards the people and you start blowing that up. Now, how much you blow up, that varies, I think. If your marriage has any sort of weakness, that it might have been able to survive without this phenomenon, but it'll get blown up with this phenomenon.
Yeah.
If you're in the same, I think it's really the same with work. If you have a great place, because we've had some people who we were coaching who really loved the places they worked for and still didn't understand where the dissonance was. And so, then they lean to the other aspects of their life and they'll blow up those, but they'll try to keep the work. they got a really great relationship. I think they try to keep that, but then they may blow up work.
Yep.
Hello, Musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
So look, like we like to say, Lady Gaga has a coach. LeBron James has a coach. Why don't you? You got to get with the program, people. Need somebody to think through stuff. Cindi, myself, and all the people that work with us at On Demand Leadership, we all have doctorates, PhDs. That means when you're telling us what's going on, we actually are scrolling through books, articles, our experience, and the research to try to give you some evidence-based strategies for why don't you try this? What if you did this? What if you change your thinking in this way? Coaching plans come in either, holy crap, something's going wrong, and we stick with you for a little bit until you get over it, or I'm looking to find another level, another gear.
Our background is management. We are trying to help you manage better, manage up, manage down.
Yeah.
Ours is just about like making the systems and the people in the systems work better.
Yeah, it is a very systems approach.
Call us about coaching, any of the programs.
Make you better at work.
ODL, ondemandleadership.com.
Yep.
Call us.
Call us. So the public service announcement for midlife crisis, from our experience, is first ask yourself, have I just come out of a phase where I've been pushing towards some kind of goal, and then it either happened or it didn't, and now I'm a little bit rudderless, and instead of finding the purpose in this next phase of my life, I'm instead obsessing about the irritants in my current life. And there will always be, the point you made is a good one. There will always be irritants in your marriage, except of course in ours, but there will always be irritants in your primary home relationship, personal relationship, as well as your primary work relationships, as well as the job that you do. It's totally based on,
there's always good and bad in everything, and it's completely based on what you're deciding to give weight to. And so when you generally feel positive about a relationship, relationships, like personal relationships, have friction, but when it's a good relationship, you're like, well, that's a small thing. Most things are great. So you discount the bad and weight heavily the good, and that allows you to sort of ride out those quick moments where you're irritated. And I think the same thing happens in organizations. Once you have that belief that you're in a good relationship or good organization, then you pay attention to the information that supports that.
Yeah. Yeah. This idea of urgency is sometimes a counterintuitive warning sign for us when we're coaching, is that people feel like, well, I have to do something about my marriage. I have to do something about this job. Well, really? You've been in the marriage for 15 years. And why now? You've been in this work for 6 or 7. What's the urgency right now? I know this is a little bit of a tricky conversation because, as Cindi mentioned, a lot of times in our role, we're actually trying to encourage people to take action. But this is a special case of people contemplating major change, and it may be out of a misplaced sense that instead of attending to finding their next purpose, they're actually spending their time looking at the deficiencies in their current life, and they're considering overcorrecting for that.
I think that's a good way of looking at it. Like, you want to make changes, look to the future and what you want that future to be, and then make the changes around that, versus what seems to happen with the midlife crisis is you're not really looking to the future. You're just looking at how everything around you stinks.
Yeah.
That's a technical term.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned earlier in the discussion that this idea of getting inheritance can actually make people feel worse. And the research that I've understood about inheritance is that inheritance is expected. The vast majority of the time you're getting money, you expect it. Mm-hmm. In a small percentage of the time you don't expect it and you get it, that actually does tend to make people happier.
I understand that.
But the everybody who thinks that their whatever parents are going to give them X, that is already absolutely baked into the cake and has been for decades.
Yeah, probably not a great idea to bake that into the cake though, because
right. But I mean, I'm talking about like the studies on this.
Yeah, I get it. So I'm just a little caveat, like shouldn't bake it into the cake that you're getting an inheritance, because old age comes with a lot of medical costs.
Yeah, right. But the point is, as it relates to this discussion, that the one reason that people might not feel good when they get an inheritance is because they've counted on it. It's like, Prince Charles becoming the king. Well, how long did that poor guy have to wait for that? And he'd already counted on, I'm going to be king, and now you're king, and it's kind of anticlimactic. Meanwhile, the whole world is telling you how wonderful, but inside you feel weird.
At some point we need to get into this, but there's a reference point here, right? Like somehow we get a reference point built into our head. Usually it's something around our parents, right? Like I achieved more than my parents did, and they're like the marker. And then like that makes it hard, I think, to then find like the next goal, the next thing. And before we wrap up here, because we are going to wrap up here, I did want to say that there's probably the reason why we tend to see this more in men than women.
Because of the Corvette and the 20-year-old.
Right. And that's what we see. So one of the reasons is that I think as a society, how we value men is not as multifaceted as what we tend to value women for.
Totally agree.
And so men, it's very much around their identities, very much around their career. And so we tend to see it happen more in men because like organizations are a pyramid. We can't have as many people at the top as we do at the bottom. Yeah. So most people aren't making it. And so you reach a point where there's nowhere else for you to go, and you're older and you feel like, we have a lot of people who we have talked to who are like, well, I'm over 40, nobody wants to hire me. There's that general sense. Yeah, we recommend entrepreneurship.
Insane.
But these are the things that are going into it where I think men are and again, I don't have the statistics. There's got to be probably some study out there that has measured this, but I'm not aware of it. But it appears to us, with the people that we work with and the myths in society about, midlife crisis, I think it's this identity piece of what is valuable that men bring to the table. And it's very narrowly focused on career. And so when you reach the apex and you feel like you're starting to run out of time, and maybe your clock has a lot more time on it, but you think that you're running out of time because this myth about 40, which isn't completely unfounded. I mean, we put in laws to protect employees who are over 40 just for this reason. There is discrimination that happened at a level high enough to actually get the government involved. So, but that myth persists even if I think the problem has been reduced in more recent times. And so you see that men, I think, suffer the midlife crisis more.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to sum it up. Cindi and I are accidental advisors to midlife crises. We shouldn't be. We have no training in it other than the social science stuff that we bring to bear, and then our own life experiences at this point.
And goal setting theory.
Yeah. Yes. And a healthy percentage maybe approaching about half the people we advise contemplating making a major change to their life. It's happening when they've become unmoored from their purpose. That happens a lot of times after the either successful or unsuccessful attainment of a goal. And there's a rudderless period. And instead of address the very difficult work of figuring out what's next, sometimes when being rudderless is taking you by surprise, sometimes when the people you trust the most are basically telling you should be feeling great and you're not, and so there's this disconnect. Instead of actually addressing the hard question of figuring out what's the next phase, purposeful phase of my life going to be, we turn inward to all of the real and perceived weaknesses or deficiencies at work and at home, and we contemplate making major changes. Our advice is usually slow your roll, think more about where your next purpose is going to come from, and see if there's a less drastic way to iron out some of the friction that currently you're perceiving to be gigantic in your work and in your home. That's Cindy's, and I share with Cindy, our unified theory of midlife crises, that a healthy percentage of these actually are misdiagnosed and overcorrected goal grief.
Thank you for joining us today on the Management Muse.
Very much.
We
Hope
appreciate...
you're not having a midlife crisis.
We hope not. We appreciate the people you don't see. We have Rebecca, Sarah, and Christina, and we appreciate you all listening. And if you are so inclined, we especially appreciate stars, likes, shares, all the good stuff that helps raise our visibility so other people can find us. We appreciate that. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Catch you later.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about the topic, check out our show notes. And if you want to help us out, like, share, subscribe, and 5 stars are all deeply appreciated. See you next time on the Management Muse.